I will introduce the next speaker. Andrea, can come. There he is, Andrea. He was the head of digital at L'Oreal, head in Tinder, and also a professor at the Fundação Dom Cabral. It's a very respectful Brazilian university. So, Andrea, thank you for being here, and welcome.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, guys. Good morning. Good morning. It was such a pleasure also to be attending Daniel's and Sabine's session. It was very insightful. And the truth is that we'll take a segue from that and talk about leadership in the digital age, or let's say a skill set for a digital world. So how we, as leaders, professionals, and teams at Shell can further accelerate this transformation that technology is bringing about to our business. And the truth is, the way I would like to start off is asking each one of you to imagine yourself being the pilot of an airplane, right? Imagine that you're in the middle of a flight that you do each week. You're very comfortable. You're, chatting with your co-pilot. But this time, suddenly, something breaks down in the engine and the plane threatens to fall. So it's panic mode. Think about it. What is the first thing that you have to do as a pilot in a situation like this? Think about it. You have to make a very quick decision. But different from a normal scenario, you have many new information at disposal. You've got sirens, lights, you've got, pressure, temperature, and everything very different from the norm. And think about it. Having this huge amount of new information at disposal will help you to make better decisions, or it makes it harder to make a better decision. Who would say that much new information helps us to make very quick, better decisions? Raise your hand. You're very confident. Who thinks it's harder to make decisions in these scenarios? Raise your hand. Exactly, it's much tougher. But still, we have to decide what we'll do next, right? The second thing, it doesn't matter we make good decisions. We have to act upon them. It doesn't matter if you get stuck and they're like, you have to, push that button, go back, learn with the mistake, and see how the plane reacts. You have to execute and act. And the third thing, think about it. You need to engage with your team, with the passengers, because alone as a pilot, you cannot go back, change the engine, and, go back to your control cockpit. No, you have to engage with these teams, and everyone has to do something and cannot stay stuck in front of the panic, of the uncertainty and everything, because otherwise this will be a great problem and the plane will eventually fall. And so why did I want to start off with this analogy of the airplane? Because the truth is that each one of you is a pilot of this airplane that is Shell, and the engine is the combination of technologies, processes, culture, data, business models that we inherited from an analogical world, pre-digital, but that today, under different circumstances, they do not work the same way that they did in the past. And so, as good pilots, we have to learn 3 basic new things. How to make decisions under this new scenario. Second, how to capitalize on them by executing. And third, how do we engage our teams, colleagues, and sometimes our customers to go about this together with us. And that's exactly what we'll talk about today. That's exactly the subject of today's speech, which will be, this is not working super well, I need your help. Okay. We'll talk about the 3 pillars of new leadership for a digital setting. As Gabriel introduced me, I was the Chief Digital Officer at L'Oreal, and I'm also a professor at Fundação Dom Cabral. I'm a keynote speaker and researcher around digital transformation, leadership, and innovation. And I've also had the Tinder, the dating app. Some of you might have heard about it. Let's not get into details, but I know some of you guys looked for me in the coffee break for tips, but let's keep that for later on. That's not the subject now. But jokes aside, the truth is that when we look at leadership and, the new skill set for our digital world, we're talking about a very different environment. a very different business environment that is shaped by what I call the 5 new forces of the digital age. Let's go about them. When we compare the digital world with the pre-digital and analog world, actually 5 new forces are putting pressure on our engine. The first one is its interconnectivity and network effects. When we look at the digital world and look at the term that defines the internet, World Wide Web, it defines a web where the business at Shell is impacted by infinite variables, many more than in a pre-digital world, because it is deeply interconnected with new consumer behavior there, like, downstream that expects transparency, sustainability. They're the users of iFood and Rappi and Grubhub, and they expect instant gratification. They also have hyper-personalization through their favorite e-commerce. They have transparency and sustainability from their preferred coffee brand. They start shaping their expectations about Shell based on those experiences and not based on what we have done in the past or based on what our competitors do. So this means the variables that impact Shell's business are not only related to the oil and gas business. Second big characteristic is everything happens real time. There is no time for procrastination, of course. There is no time for hyper planning. It's a time to go about execution and get this immediate feedback that you get from executing your projects, your innovations. And therefore, this means that agility, of course, is one of the key characteristics that we need nowadays. Third characteristic of a digital world is big data. Everything is measurable. Everything has to be measured, and we see that through also the new technologies that Sabine was talking about. Blockchain can help us track everything. And so in a world of big data, the challenge is how do we make better decisions based on this data? Because data will be a commodity. Now we're struggling to get the data. But very soon, the challenge will be how we make best decisions based on all this data. And we have to get ready for that. The fourth characteristic is the exponentiality of the rate of change. Let's look at the energy sector. Who would say that the energy sector hasn't changed more over the last 5 years than the 30 previous years? And we all can agree that it will change over the next 2-3 years more than it has ever changed. And this is a reflection of the exponentiality of innovation, of the laws of digital. Because when we look at Moore's law, for example, that is behind the rise of semiconductors and explains that they actually double in capacity and power every 2 years on average, this is an exponential law. It's not a linear law to which we were used to, where when something changes in a linear manner, basically everything is more predictable, everything goes slower. When something is exponential, think about it. There's 2 characteristics to it. First of all, the rate of change is faster and faster, which means that we have to update our knowledge, expectations, beliefs faster and faster than we're used to. And the second thing is that at the beginning of an exponential change, it seems that nothing is really changing until it gets to a point of flexion where if you're not ready, if you're not leading the way, then it will be too late because someone else will take advantage of that. And the fifth and last characteristic of a digital world is AI, artificial intelligence, this new technology that threatens to substitute some of our knowledge, skills, and cognitive skills. Because if we think that we're better leaders or professionals just because we have more knowledge, because we are more intelligent, smarter, our IQ is higher, we'll have a problem because AI is much better than us in all of this. And so the truth is that it puts a lot of pressure on us as leaders to change the way that we think about business and change the way we think about our own skill set. And when we put all these 5 characteristics together, they change all markets, not only oil and gas, not only energy. Let's look at another market that, to me, until 10 years ago, you wouldn't say it was innovating. The automotive, the car-making industry, right? Until 10 years ago, there was no new car maker launching. There were very high barriers to entry. Nobody was risking getting into that business. And who was losing? The end customer, paying prices, every time higher for models that were not very innovative. And then this guy comes in. Elon Musk, and launches Tesla with a very different value proposition. He basically puts a computer on 4 wheels and sells it without, intermediaries, direct to consumer. He actually measures everything that happens with the car at the point that they have so many data that they are actually launching now an insurance. So a car maker getting into a market that usually is not for car makers. But why are they getting into insurance, launching a very personalized insurance for Tesla drivers? Why? Because they have the data. And so when you think about it, they're much better positioned to launch a very personalized, very tailor-made, and assertive insurance and disrupt the market rather than an insurer that has maybe 100, 200 years of market. And so when we look at the exponentiality of also changes in markets, we see that in the automotive, where in June 2020, Tesla became the most valuable car maker in the world. And it is not just by selling cars, because Toyota sells 30 times more cars than Tesla still. But it is about the intangible of innovation, of value generation to the customer, and of a new style of leadership that does not only look at the past and copies and pastes and just thinks that this success will live forever, but that basically defies the beliefs that they have and decides not to be a spectator and just an observer of this change. Because when we look at these changes, we can go about them in two just different ways. First one is just observing them. It got stuck. Sorry, guys. So basically, the first one would be, okay, Andrea, at Shell, we're leaders in our market. We have a lot of experience. We're doing many good things. Things are well, then why should we change? This is the question that we ask ourselves the whole time, right? It's like, why should we change now? Because things are doing well. And my answer to that is kind of like, okay, then let's wait for things not be good then to change. It's too late. And look at all the examples of Kodak, BlackBerry, Nokia. They were leaders in their markets, and they failed, but not because new competitors got into their market. This will always happen. This will never change in business. But it was their lack of willingness to change in face of changing consumer needs, changing technology, changes in the market, changes in end consumer behavior. Because it really belongs to us. It's our decision whether we want just to be observers or whether we want to actually be the main characters of this movie that is reshaping all kinds of industries and that asks to the traditional players to have leaders and teams engaged in a, change management process that understands that, again, it's not only about technology, because one very interesting thing here is oftentimes we just associate being the main characters of this transformation with just digitizing our business. And we say, okay, let's just implement new technologies, let's roll out new CRM, let's automate this and that, launch e-commerce and apps, and then the results will come. The truth is that when we associate digital transformation with digitization, the results prove not to be very successful, up to the point that a recent McKinsey report shows that although 8 in 10 companies declare that they have digital transformation processes undergoing, basically only 16% are able to measure any impact out of them. And where is the problem? Where is the gap? The gap is oftentimes we associate digital transformation with technology. And we think that technology and the technological change is the end of the transformation. The truth is that technology is just a means. It's a means to a much harder transformation, which is a behavioral transformation, a cognitive transformation, a cultural transformation. Therefore, it is about people. It is about how we think, we act, we engage with others through technology and responding to technology, making better decisions based on technology. So that we oftentimes forget that if we use the best technologies such as blockchain and maybe renewables, and we look at automation and everything, but we still make decisions the old way, we still execute them in the old manner, and we still collaborate in the old fashion that we inherited from a pre-digital world, the power of these technologies will not be harnessed. And so, this is why we need a new leader, which has these 3 new pillars of change. And so basically, starting from the first one, we want to think about how leaders and good professionals make decisions and think in a different way in a digital world. And the first thing, we'll talk then about a cognitive transformation. And to start off with that, I want to actually start off with a story of how Polaroid was invented. Does anyone know how this story of Polaroid was invented? Because it's a very interesting one. It was born through a question, a kind of dumb question that a 4-year-old kid asked her dad. She said, "Dad, can I see the picture that you just took?" And nowadays, this question is just obvious. You just pick your smartphone, you just show the picture to your daughter. But it was 1944, and there was no such technology. And so the father was surprised. He said, "No, my dear, you cannot see a picture because you need to go to a dark chamber, you need a technician, it will be long, it will be costly. You cannot see it now." But he was intrigued by this possibility that his daughter made him think that he actually went after such a technology. He discovered, he developed it, and he eventually launched it to the market. He was Edward Land, a famous inventor by the time and the founder of Polaroid. And I would like you to think something with me. Do you think any adult would have asked such a question? Any engineer? Any expert coming from the photo industry? No, but why? Why so? Because they already knew the answer, which was that there was no technology to reveal and to print the picture instantaneously. And this makes us think that oftentimes when we think that we're better leaders and professionals just because we have all the answers, we are wrong. In a rapidly changing world, in an exponential world, we're better leaders if we ask the right questions, if we defy the traditional beliefs, because technology is changing, consumer behaviors are changing, the market's changing, and if we do not ask more questions, then bring answers, if we do not rethink rather than just think and make decisions, we will be stuck in the past and stuck in those old beliefs that affect any kind of industry, needless to say, the energy sector as well. And look, there is, some of these beliefs are so strong that they even become sayings. And there is one in Portuguese, and I will explain this to who is not from Brazil. There is a saying that says, "Fly because rockets cannot land," right? Voa porque foguete não tem ré. Who says this with their teams as a way to, motivate them, right? Think about it. Rocket goes into space, and traditionally it would crash after the mission. The problem is that in 2017, we all saw the images of SpaceX landing a rocket and showing that, yes, foguete pode pousar, and that there is no belief that is strong enough not to be broken through actually this critical thinking that leaders have. Because when we look at the aerospace industry, right, Elon Musk defied the odds of something that NASA and all the big players were not even researching anymore, which was a way to land a rocket. And the big problem is that the cost of the rocket was a big bottleneck for the industry. And so the industry would believe that there will never be a viable economically flight to the space. Why? Because every time that you will send a rocket to the space, you will have to pay tens of millions of dollars to just rebuild it, because it will shatter while landing. And so instead of saying, okay, I'll then do research and maybe in 30 years I will, marginally decrease the cost of the rocket, maybe I'll attack the problem from a different perspective. And I'll try to find a way to land them, because that will save me a lot of money. And again, this was not just looking at the answers, it was about asking the right questions. And sometimes the right questions are the dumb questions, are the ones that we avoid because they're too difficult, or that we feel ashamed to ask. Why? Because we think about the judgment that we will have. We will think, okay, I have so many years at Shell that if I bring about this subject, people will laugh at me because I have so much experience. Well, as Jack Ma says, the founder of Alibaba, he says, well, I actually like those dumb questions. Why? Because oftentimes they point to big problems. And oftentimes they give us the chance to solve those big problems. Why? Because no one's looking at them Why? Because they think they're just too dumb. But in a world that actually opens us to many new possibilities through new technologies, through viabilizing them, through defying those beliefs in the past, again, the leader nowadays is not anymore just the one that thinks as an expert, but it's a bit of its opposite. He has, and she has, a beginner's mindset, which is the mindset of someone that looks at all their beliefs, knowledge, experiences, and does not throw them in the trash. They're all very important, but at the same time does not use them as copy and paste for their future challenges. But yes, as a starting point. A starting point for what? For a constant questioning whether they're still aligned with the external changes in the market, in the consumer, in technology, in our customer. Because if for a moment internal change at Shell is ever lower than the external changes, we do not have to be mathematicians to understand it means we are getting more and more obsolete and disaligned with changing consumer and customer expectations. And that will be definitely a big problem in a world that is changing and where consumers are more and more picky. And so basically, when you look at this beginner's mindset, it really helped me at the beginning when, at the beginning of 2014, I was launching Tinder in Brazil. What Tinder did was looking at all the dating websites, pointing up to what they were doing wrong. Oh, long forms, geolocation that would not work out. You could just send messages to anyone, which will become spam. It was not on a mobile, it was on a website. So one by one, we solved all these problems and we created an app with geolocation, funny, engaging, gamified. With a beginner's mindset, we had great success. And so already in 2017, Tinder became the top grossing app on the App Store here in Brazil. But what happens when you have success in business is that, oddly enough, it turns your beginner's mindset back to an expert's mindset. Why? Because finally we get to the success and we do everything that we can to cling to it. We implement bureaucracies, processes, routines, beliefs to get the most out of that success through efficiency, through optimization, which is not necessarily bad, but it goes a little bit against business transformation. And so when you stop reacting swiftly to changing consumer and customer behavior, what happens? Well, there might be someone else who's faster and comes at you and solves those problems on your behalf and gets your market. And that was what happened with Tinder. In 2016 and 17 came out a new app called Bumble, a copy and paste of Tinder. Just only different thing was that it was yellow instead of orange, and with a second, very, very, very small thing, that only women could send the first message after the match. And when the first time I was, that's another copycat of Tinder. It will never be successful. Let's forget about them. But I was wrong. Because what I didn't notice is that with the success of Tinder came another problem. Especially women would receive, because it was so many matches and so many users, a lot of messages after the match. Usually those cut and paste messages that we would have already pre-written on our, phone. We would cut and paste them after the match, and women would have an awful experience on Tinder. And so they were leaving looking for an alternative where they could be the ones in power to start a conversation. And so when we saw, I was totally wrong because Bumble was extremely successful. And at the beginning of last year, they IPO'd on the stock market in the US. And Whitney Wolf, the founder of Bumble, she became the youngest billionaire in the world. And you'd be like, Andrea, okay, but you're talking about a startup. This is not going to apply to Shell. And so this is why I brought an example of another company that is much more traditional than Tinder that some of you might know. It's called MRV Engenharia. Is one of the biggest construction company and engineering companies in Brazil, from Família Menin, from Minas Gerais. And basically, what they did is that they always showed this kind of a beginner's mindset to always look at their customers' problems and try to solve them, although it was not part of their expertise. Because what they noticed around 10 years ago is that one of the biggest problems of their customers was to get a mortgage. Like it would take months and a lot of paperwork through traditional banks, and they would pay crazy interest rates. And so that was a problem for them because they would sell less apartments because of this bottleneck. And so they said, okay, we're a construction company, we're not a banking company, but although we'll try to learn and get into that market and see what happens. And so they bought a small bank called Intermedium, and they digitized the bank. They started to, like fasten operations, and this was proven to be successful, but actually much more successful than expected. So that it grew, up to the point that it became Banco Inter, that some of you might know, maybe are even customer of, that is one of the biggest fintechs in Brazil. And when we think about it, it was born within a construction company. And you'd be like, Andrea, like what a lack of focus. Like their construction company, why should they focus on launching a digital bank? And the truth is that my answer is the opposite. That's a lot of focus. It's no focus, and it's a lack of focus on their product, their market, their competition, but it's a lot of focus on the most important thing that there is, which is the customer. And when we look at companies that are extremely customer-centric, like Amazon, Amazon has this great story that basically there is always an empty chair in their meeting rooms that Jeff Bezos, at first, the founder of Amazon, would always take and put next to the table, meeting table, whenever everyone was seated, just to remind about one thing, that was the customer's chair, that it was the most important person in the room, although not being there. And oftentimes we make decisions without that customer chair. We start from our product, we start from our processes, we start from our own objectives, and we forget about the customer, especially in an upstream business. And so the truth is that we have to bring back the chair into the room, metaphorically. And why so? Because consumers and customers are much more powerful now in a digital world than in the past. And as leaders, we have to acknowledge that. And therefore, we have to change our focus. Because let's look at the 4 big levers that empower our customers with respect to the past. First of all, customers have more access to information in a digital world. They can read reviews, they can compare, they can inform themselves about these new technologies that you're suggesting them. And we are not at Shell, the only source of information anymore. This, of course, empowers any customer, especially end consumers, that are the final recipients of our upstream operations. Second thing, there's more competition, but not only more competition in our upstream, drilling and producing market, but also there's more competition in channels, in the way that our consumer can engage with us. There's more competition in the attention and focus of our consumers. Third one, there's lower switching costs. Technology and digital has lowered the switching cost of a customer that maybe was like, in a very long-standing relationship with Shell because we were the only options, or just because they were not aware of alternatives, or it just was too costly to switch us. Now, it's much easier. You can do digital contracts. You can just, find other suppliers and so on. And so this has put a lot of power to the customer. And is that customers are content creators. And so, especially end consumers, they talk about business. And so, therefore, what happens is that they talk about their impact that these businesses have on their expectations. Because I want you to imagine yourself living in a world that you can see Netflix addicts will recognize this coming from the Black Mirror series, which basically is a world where at every interaction that you have, let's say that you interact with a customer, you liked, the way that they behaved, you give 5 stars, they liked your pitch, you give also 5 stars back, and everything that you do with your customers, with your colleagues, with your leaders is measured. And this rating kind of like, is like a hologram that sticks on the top of our heads and is visible and transparent to anyone else. Think about living in such a world. First of all, what would happen in our relation with our customers? We definitely focus on providing the best experience ever. Has anyone rented their apartment before Airbnb? You would leave your apartment kind of like, tidy, but not so clean, because, of Of course, whatever, who would know, right? It was the story about taxis and Ubers eventually. Now you rent it out on Airbnb, you double check the house and you clean every single, part of it. Why? Because we have this expectation of being, in a transparent word, of providing the best consumer experiences. The second thing that I want you to think about is, are we living in a world that is very far away from this one? Of course not. We all have a rating. It's just opening our Uber app or our, again, TripAdvisor and stuff like that. All establishments and even people, we all have ratings. And the third thing that I want you to think about is, what happens in such a world where through digital interactions between companies and customers, we actually collect more data. And when we look at the volume of data generated since the beginning of humanity, this has been growing exponentially, where more than 90% of data generated since the beginning of times was generated over the last 10 years. And this does not stop to grow. And one of the great things that we, jump to conclusions and we think, okay, this is amazing. The more data that we'll have from Sabine's teams or from our operations, from blockchain or from digital twins, the better decisions we will make. And this conclusion is most, of the times wrong. Why? Because it really depends on what we do with this data and how able are we to actually make better decisions based on them. Because I'd like you to think about the following situation. Imagine that you wake up not feeling well. You have some strange symptoms. You have some rashes on your skin. You don't know what it is, and you rush to your doctor, and you say, doctor, please, look at me, make a diagnosis. What do you think I have? And imagine a situation where your doctor says, Andrea, do not even take your shirt off. I don't need to watch your symptoms. I think that you have this, and that because you told me about it, so just take this medicine, go home. You'd feel frustrated. They will likely, give you the wrong prescription. You will have side effects. So you're thinking, why, Andrea, are you making such an example? It's because oftentimes in business, we're no different from this doctor. We prescribe something to our customers. It's not based on their symptoms. Oftentimes, it's based on our own symptoms, our own pain points. What are these symptoms? What are these pain points? Our objectives, our goals, our vision that we establish oftentimes internally without collaborating so much with the customer, but that in a world where the customer is every time more empowered, we cannot help but doing differently. And so whenever we look at that, we can think, okay, then why not sitting down with our customer and asking them what they want? And this does not work as well, because when Steve Jobs was about to launch their iPhone in 2006, he was doing focus groups. And he was asking people, which kind of smartphone would you love to have? And everyone was giving always the same answer. They were asking for bigger smartphones with a bigger keyword. And why? Keyboard. Who reminds of those years? Reminds that the leader was BlackBerry, and people were finding the keyboard at BlackBerry as being too little and hard to push and press. Nobody ever asked a smartphone that would have no keyboard. And so if Steve Jobs would have followed the advice of our customer, we would all have like huge devices that would not even fit in our pockets. And so asking our customer what do they want is not enough for us to understand what they need. Why? Because through big data, we have to anticipate their symptoms and understand better through predictive analysis what they might need without them even being able to express that. Why? Because if they're able to express that, it means we're getting there too late, because the whole market already knows, and we're just competing as usual with the other players. It's not making us innovative. And when we look at the health sector is changing dramatically thanks to that. Sensors, Internet of Things, hyperconnectivity on devices is actually changing the patient journey from one that is very reactive, that basically, provides your treatment based on your symptoms, to another one that through big data and through correlation of symptoms is much more proactive and reduces the chance of you having a terminal or like a, chronic disease. And so this is thanks to all these technologies and all the big data, but it also asks us to be able to make different decisions than in the past. And so when we look at an example of that, we see that basically Philips and Delta Dental in the US partnered, and Philips as a hardware provider, they basically made an interconnected toothbrush. It basically measures how many times and for how long you brush your teeth every day, and sends these data to the Delta Dental, that is like an oral care provider, that is able to reduce the amount that you pay on an insurance based on a good behavior, and of course they will increase it based on bad behavior if you forget to brush your teeth. And this, of course, is an example of a B2C business. But when we look at also at B2B, and when we look at all the opportunities that we have of collecting data of our customers, and even of not only customers and consumers, we're able to predict much better and make better decisions if, though, as leaders, we're able not to use our success of the past as the starting point, but we're able to predict what the future will look like through the symptoms that we collect nowadays. Now, who remembers the analogy of the airplane will remember that, though, making good decisions and identifying these customer pain points is not enough. Because if we do not act upon them, which is our second pillar of transformation, we will just, have great PowerPoint slides and we'll have just great plans and PR campaigns, but we will not impact the customer. And the truth is that this is the hardest thing to do, to transform good decisions and ideas in execution. Why? Because of what Professor Clayton Christensen would call the innovator's dilemma. That basically says that companies that are very successful, leaders in their markets like Shell, they have a problem. They have a problem of transforming their innovative ideas into execution. Why? Because innovating is inherently inefficient. And you'd be like, Andrea, please stop, because everything I know about innovation is that it is efficient. Maybe the result of innovation is efficient, but the innovation process is the least efficient thing there's out there. Think about it. It takes time, it's frustrating, it's costly, it would not prove a return in the short term, it will cannibalize some of our traditional models, and so when it is the time to execute on those very ambitious plans that we all have already internally approved, something gets lost. We think, okay, let's leave it for next semester. Oh no, this will definitely make that customer hungry. Or no, our sales team will not accept that digital tool. And so we eventually postpone, until oftentimes it's too late. Because let's look at the innovator dilemma that was in the DVD market many years ago, for who recalls those times. Netflix, before streaming, was a DVD rental company by subscription. But the leader of the market at that time was Blockbuster. Everyone knows this story. Blockbuster was, renting out one by one those DVDs, and you had to give them back by a certain date, otherwise they will charge you an extra fee. It was very bad for a customer. Netflix was like paying monthly, and you can be, staying with them for how long as you wanted. And one day, the CEO at Blockbuster presented a plan to their board of directors, where they suggested also the opportunity to change their business model towards a subscription-based one as Netflix. The board looked at the plan, made some calculations, and said, no, we are not changing our business plan. And you know what was the allegation not to change? It was because Blockbuster was earning 12% of their revenues based on late returnal fees. If they would change their business model, they would give up 12% of their fees in face of, I don't know how many much more revenues I will make through this new business model, because I just haven't done it yet. But by protecting those 12%, in that famous meeting, what they decided is that they would prefer to protect those today to lose 100% of the revenues in some years in front. And the truth is that, of course, we cannot predict with certainty the costs of our decisions to protect our past successes. But in a way or another, we can already suspect that something will pop up and we'll have to pay a price. Now, a company that overcame innovators' dilemma very well is Disney. By launching Disney Plus, they made a decision that no business school would suggest you to make, which is to give up something that's doing really well, which was their partnership with Netflix. They were earning billions of dollars through licensing contracts. They were just producing content and Netflix would distribute it. But in 2019, they decided it's enough. I'm gonna stop my partnership with Netflix. I'm gonna take out all the content and I'm gonna launch my own platform. I'm going direct to consumer. It's more profitable, I will collect data, number of reasons. And the day they launched it, the stocks of Disney went crumbling down the floor. Nobody in Wall Street would understand why a company that was doing something so well would give up that success. And the truth is that this, again, is what the innovator's dilemma makes us think. And when we look, though, today, we see already Disney Plus being already at the half of subscribers of Netflix and proving Wall Street that Wall Street was wrong because it became Disney's most important project internally. And we see traditional companies having innovators' dilemma the whole time. IKEA, biggest furniture company in the world. What they're doing in Europe, they implemented a furniture by subscription model, where instead of selling you furniture, you pay a monthly fee, and once a year you have the right to change that furniture. And why did they do so? Because Generation Z wants to have this flexibility, they want to change it. But think about the paradox. The more subscriptions they will sell, the less furniture they would sell, which is their core business model. But in face of changing consumer behavior and expectations, what they did, they thought, again, that same question as before, if it's not me doing that, then I risk someone else coming and taking my place. And so we face the innovator dilemma the whole time, and the only thing to step out of it and to overcome it is by executing, by testing, prototyping, and not just through ideation, but through, again, working like a scientist, setting a hypothesis, testing it all the time through agile methodologies, getting the feedback and scaling what works and leaving aside what doesn't. And there is this great book by Larry Bossidy, Ram Charam, that suggests, among his first phrases, that basically execution is the only thing that provides us the feedback that we need in order to pivot and to change our projects. Oftentimes, we follow our projects, like that we decide under one roof without getting so much feedback from the customer, and we do not get feedback in between. And so the problem is that we oftentimes end up very far away from where our customer wanted us to go. Why? Because we didn't collect the feedback. When we execute something and test it and prototype the whole time, we'll get much closer to where the market and the consumer wants us to be. And this follows a concept that I call the 20 miles marches. That's coming from a story of how, like the South Pole was reached by feet for the first time. Because it was 1911, and two expeditions were competing to see who would be the first to reach the South Pole. And on the one side, there was Scott. And his expedition, they had a strategy where on sunny days, they would push the most they could, do 100, 200, 300 miles, and they would rest on very cold days. Now, on the other side, the Norwegian Amundsen, he had another strategy. Every day, he would do 20 miles. Not more, not less, but 20 miles, he would do what? He would open the map, adjust his route for the following day. He would load things based on the conditions. He would get the feedback from his team. He would generate discipline. And at the end of the day, when we look at history, Amundsen was the first man to reach the South Pole through this strategy, while Scott and the whole expedition, they died along the way back. And what's the message here for us at Shell? Is that oftentimes we look at projects and we look at innovation and at business transformation as if it was a 1,000 miles march, a 10,000 miles march. We look at macro projects because we think if I do something very small in such a big company, it will not make a change. The opposite is true. It's the sum of the small actions that will provide us to be much more innovative than just those few shots that we decide by the end of the year what we'll do over the next year in a changing market, in a changing environment, in a very unpredictable world, but that we stick to it because we've spent so much time planning oftentimes, but we don't get the feedback. And so when we experiment something, maybe even as small as changing the color of a button on our website, of changing one step of the process is not the whole process, of implementing digital twins, maybe not in the whole factory, but maybe in just one small step of the process, that's how we get the feedback, and we scale what we like as a result, and we set aside what we don't like. And here, you might think, Andrea, there's a big problem, which is, if you're asking me to experiment more, then you're asking me to make more mistakes, and that's very bad. The truth is that it's not as bad as you might think, because think about a scientist and their work. Do you think that a scientist would ever discover anything if they do not allow themselves to make mistakes? Of course not. And I know very well because I grew up in a home with a scientist. That's my mom. She spent her whole career until today. She's still a researcher at the Università di Genova in Italy in microbiology. And when I was a kid, I would grow up with her sometimes getting back from work and tell me, wow, that was a very good day at work today. And so it was on those days that I would get all excited. I would think, okay, then I'm turning, I'm going to become the son of a Nobel Prize winner. And I was like, then tell me, what did you discover? And she was like, Andrea, I didn't discover anything today. And then I would get frustrated. I would ask her, then Mom, why did you consider your day good at work? And the answer that she would give me, it taught me a lot about how we should interpret mistakes in business as well, and not only in science. She would tell me, it's just because today I managed to make a lot of experiments. And although they were all failed, I managed to discover many ways in which my hypotheses do not work. And this made me understand that not all mistakes are bad. When we look at mistakes, we can categorize them in three big areas. First, bad mistakes which are evitable because we forget about things, because we don't pay attention. Of course, we don't want those. The ones that are inevitable, that do not depend on by us, we want to minimize them, but maybe, I don't know, like a machinery breaks down. We don't want those. And we have to minimize them through maintenance or stuff like that. But there's a third category that we can call smart mistakes. They are mistakes that we voluntarily do. Why? Because we're exploring areas of which we have no knowledge, of which we have no control. But oftentimes, these are the areas where innovation is. And so they have certain characteristics. We design their scope, so they have a clear scope. We, by designing them, minimize their cost, so that they're less painful. They provide us feedback so that we learn through them, and they're done under, normal circumstances. Let's look at Post-it. Post-it was a great example of a smart mistake. It was like by 1969 at 3M, an engineer invented a glue that would not glue. And so instead of hiding this under the carpet, he would share it with the rest of the organization. And 10 years after, it was used by another engineer that was looking for a product that would stick, but not stick too much, and it became the most successful consumer product of 3M. And so this makes us understand that as leaders, we have to change our framework of interpretation of mistakes and take it from a traditional one, which is the one that oftentimes we have today, that we consider mistakes as being something non-acceptable, as good professionals, those that do not make mistakes, and as our roles as leaders of that of minimizing mistakes, we have to take this model and change it to one where we actually understand that mistakes, smart mistakes, are part of a process of business transformation and innovation, where good professionals are the ones who most learn through mistakes, and where our role as leaders is to maximize the learning from those mistakes. So we take a model that goes about mistakes minimization to one that is learning maximization from smart mistakes. And this is very liberating. Why? Because we do new things. And I want you to reflect upon something. When was the last time that you did something very new here at work? Because oftentimes it can be a very long time, up to the point that we do not remember. Why? Because we're stuck in processes, habits, and routines. And so if we do not look at that, we will not be able to, again, respond to these everly rapidly changing consumer expectations. When we look at them, the expectations of our consumer or customer are shaped by the best experiences they have in other fields. Let's look. Again, they look at transparency, they look at sustainability, they look at instant gratification, they look at personalization and friction reduction. They look at all these things and many others, and if we're not able to do something differently, then we will lose the opportunities of fulfilling these ever-changing consumer expectations. Now, third and last pillar, for who recalls the analogy of an airplane, remembers that you cannot change this engine alone. You need to engage others in this process. And so the truth is that a leader in a digital world, the paradox is that it has to focus more on their human side rather than just on the technical side. Rather than just defining ourselves as good leaders and smarter because our IQ is higher, we have to consider also our emotional quotient and our ability to be complementary to artificial intelligence and not being substitutable. And oftentimes all these that we call soft skills are kind of like neglected in the workplace. Why? Because they're hard to measure. And so we think, okay, collaboration is important because, we talk a lot about this buzzword within the company, but how do I measure the impact of collaboration on Shell's bottom line? And the truth is that there's great examples of companies where leadership, a human and very empathic leadership, has managed to bring about results. And one example comes from a company that everyone knows, Domino's Pizza, but that no one maybe knows that in 2008 was at the brink of failure. Consumers complaining on social media that pizza, tasted like cardboard, and a new CEO came in, Patrick Doyle. And Patrick Doyle, the first thing that he did was launch a campaign called Failure is an Option. And he shot a video that was promoted internally where he would present himself to the company, listing one by one, not all of his successes until then and saying, oh, I'm very good, you should believe in me. He listed all his failures, one by one. And at the end, he would say, you should believe in me because I'm vulnerable enough to share those. And now I expect the same from you. And what did this video make as a cultural transformation? He ignited a behavioral change where people started to share more of their mistakes and of their fears and of their questions. And if I share all of those with you, what am I giving you? The chance for you to collaborate with me. And people started trading and collaborating more. And by this, they started to reinforce trust. And with more trust, more collaboration as a consequence again, and more collaboration, more innovation. And when we look at the results, Domino's has had one of the biggest business transformation over the last decade, with their stock, increasing by 1,800% over the last decade. And now they're considered one of the most innovative companies in the world by Fast Magazine. And you think about a pizza company among the most innovative companies, because also how much can you innovate with pizza, right? As an Italian, I must confess you cannot go too far and change pizza flavors. Now that we're in Brazil, please guys, no frango en catupiry. This is not innovation. So innovation is about culture. Then we understand it's not about the product that we make. It's not about our market. It's about the culture that we shape as leaders. And so basically, when we have this, we look trust as being the great glue for this culture. And so trust is made by two factors based on their basically definition. One is vulnerability, and the second one is the expectations that we shape on one another. And basically, this, we're talking about reciprocity. And reciprocity, the best way to explain how it works is through an example that I want you to think about. Let's say it's a Friday night, and you go out, for a couple of drinks, you drink something, and then you get the car to get back. You cannot drive and drink, and so basically you're stopped by police. And they give you a DUI, they take your, CNH, you take your driving license, and it's 2 a.m. You do not want to wake up anyone at home because everyone's sleeping, but you always remember of that friend. We all have that one friend that we can trust always. And you pick the phone, you call that person, and you're like, please come and pick me up, I need a ride. And the person was already sleeping. They get dressed, they go at your place, they drive you back home, they stop for, like a sandwich and something. And when you're at home, you look at them, and before getting up to your place, you ask a last question. You ask, hey, friend, why did you do all this for me? And I want you to think about the answer, because it's always the same in 100% of cases. It's because I knew you would have done the same for me. And so the truth is that we do our craziest thing, our most innovative things, our most, transformational things, not because someone asks us to do them, not because someone tells us, starting from today, Shell will be more agile, will be more customer-focused, will be more innovative. It's not about knowledge. It's not about the information that changes behavior. And so if it's not information, why we do these things? It's basically, we do them because of the same two things that teach children to crawl. Because as a last thing, I would like you to think about something. How do you teach a child to crawl? Is it like telling them, oh, you have to put before like one knee and then one arm? And of course not. It's by example? No. It's two things. You have to put the baby with their belly down. Because think about it, at that age, they're super comfortable belly up. And so if you as a parent do not put them 5, 10, 15 minutes per day, they will never develop these muscles that are necessary for them to crawl. And the same thing within Shell. We all fight against that gravitational force that is the processes, routines, and habits and culture that we inherited from the past that make us look for optimization, efficiency, and, of course, results, but that do make us a little bit more, right, less innovative and less transformational. And so whenever we look at that, we need one with the other to help each other, right, develop these new behaviors, develop these new contexts in which we'll experiment more, we'll test more some of these new behaviors, customer centricity, innovation, tolerance for mistakes, and so on. And the second thing that makes children crawl is, of course, you put some toys around them. But in our case, studies show that it's not the financial incentives that make us really change behavior. So if it's not them, what it is? It's one thing, and it's the most important of all. It's the purpose of why we have to do the hardest thing that it exists, which is changing our behaviors, changing our mindset, changing the way we go about our business. It's understanding why we have to do that. Having the sense of urgency, of understanding that in a world where technology is changing, where end consumer of energy is changing, where our customer is changing, and where the market is eventually changing, if we do not change at the same rate as them, inevitably, for how much effort we make, we run the risk of becoming obsolete. And of course, nobody here in this room wants that to happen. And therefore, I wish you great luck in accelerating this digital and cultural transformation as leaders. And I count on each one of you. Thanks a lot for your attention, and we can open for questions. Thanks again.
Let's do 5 minutes of Q&A. I think we can have, right?
Yeah, please. Yeah, we can.
Andrea, thank you very much for the presentation. It was great. Yeah, can take a breath
Thank you.
while let me speak. Quite intense. Yeah.
Thank you.
I build a lot of links what you presented with some of team leadership dilemmas. Yeah, and one of the transformation that we are still went through is what the pandemic imposed us. To be presential, now virtual, and now is hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are still learning. We still have a lot of bias because one example, if you see a busy office, it sounds like you have more integration, more innovation, more productivity, perhaps. Yeah. So could you describe a little bit what you have been seeing on that?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I want also to answer within the context of not only collaboration within the company, but let's also think this within the context of like relationship with the customer. Because it's the same thing. Our sales team are like, wow, that migrated online, but then now I'm hybrid. What really changes? Because I can get back to meetings, I can keep it on Zoom. So the truth is that when we look at a hybrid workplace or a hybrid relation with our customer, is that digital changes the meaning of physical. And this is really important. Because if we go about hybrid work settings with the physical interactions being the same as before, and therefore going to the office and staying by ourselves and responding emails or having just a meeting with our team that could have been done on Zoom or just spending the afternoon calling clients, this is not the hybrid setting that we want because it's not using digital as a way to reshape the meaning of physical. And so the truth is that we have to understand what are the touch points that we can outsource to digital, and therefore small team meetings, small catch-ups, relationship with customer, definitely, most of them can be changed, but this will actually redefine the meaning of physical, where we have to rethink that the way we go about in office settings. And so we have to, for example, doesn't make a lot of sense if we go to the office and most of our team is not there. Or if we go scattered and we just go because we have to stay one day at the office and so on. It's the same thing as with a customer. Let's say I'll make an example with the customer journey. With digital, we are able to extract important informations or to provide important informations to our customer online, right? We can provide some extra information before a meeting. We can do follow-up to a meeting and so on. If we do not take advantage on that, our physical in-person meetings will always be the same, where we just sit down with them, we have maybe 1 hour with our customer, and we go about the old way, which was, I will spend 55 minutes of that talking, providing all the information, kind of vomiting information, and the last 5 minutes, maybe I'll ask them if they have any question. With digital, if we're able to provide before the information and make sure that it has been absorbed, then we can use the 1 hour meeting with them in a totally different way. Starting off, do you have any doubts about that? How that has helped you? How can we do differently? Asking questions and listening and interacting more. And therefore, I think the same thing when it comes to our team management and our hybrid work settings. I think digital redefines the meaning of physical. Thanks for the question.
Do we have time for one more?
I think so.
Well, first of all, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was fascinating and very entertaining. So
Thank you.
You have some 5 stars hanging over your head. So
Thank you.
You tell us when you have to click.
Thank you. Exactly. I was making the Airbnb example because I'm obsessed about my Airbnb now that I live abroad and I have an apartment.
Yeah.
So thanks also for the speaking because I'm less obsessed on this side as well. Thanks.
Okay, great. So the question is probably not directly related to the subject, but it's somehow related, which is that people are normally fascinated by the final product of innovation.
Yeah.
But normally, especially in an organization as big as ours, you face pockets of excellence and excitement, but a lot of resistance through the innovation process itself. Yeah. So any thoughts on how we can bring people together for the innovation process itself? Because everyone loves the innovation product, but how can you make people come together to help in the innovation process itself?
That's a great point. And it's exactly, getting back to the innovator's dilemma that you mentioned. It's exactly this. We all love the outcome of innovation, but oftentimes we're not ready to pay the price of the process of it. And so oftentimes when we have these kind of like maybe internal statements, which is our objective now for our area is to balance innovation and profitability, innovation and efficiency. These two words oftentimes are hard to combine, and oftentimes we have to make a choice. And so we cannot have all things at the same time. And so what I think some of the ways for us to go more about the innovation process. So one thing is one that I mentioned about the 20 miles marches, but that I can use a synonym which would be short-term experimentation and feedback collection. So agile methodologies are all about that, which is constantly through sprints and through very short time periods, setting an objective of experimenting and launching something that will be minimally viable, and you get the feedback, and each interaction you decide what to scale and what not to scale. And why this is very important? Because within the innovation process, it makes you achieve small and quick results faster. Because one of the first things that we have to attack about the innovation process is that it's long and frustrating, and oftentimes we give up earlier than we get at the end of it. And so if we do not have like short-term feedback loops, we will give up. The second thing is to minimize the cost of it, because the second big problem, besides frustration, it takes long, is the cost of the innovation process. And oftentimes, because of the fact that we do not even want to admit that we can be wrong and that we can incur mistakes, we do not design the outcomes of the mistakes, and therefore, we do not control their costs. And if we do not design for also the other scenarios where we would be wrong in those projects, costs will go up there because we have not designed for those. And then it's worse because the project gets more costly and it's more likely to be stopped within the process. So whenever we create scenarios for costs and use even digital technologies for cost minimization, because one thing is to go about, for example, creating a prototype of a new equipment with the same material of the end equipment. That's one way. It will be costly. It will replicate reality. Okay, that's fine. But it will be costly. And so if you mistake that, if you make a mistake, you will pay the consequence. And therefore, the culture within Shell will be more, then we already did that mistake, well, let's not do it again. Second way would go about 3D printing with like some very cheap material, that same equipment, and seeing how it reacts, how it fits. It will not be as realistic as the first one, but you will lower very much the price. A third scenario is using a digital twin, where you basically replicate through 3D, and it's virtual, it's a little bit less realistic, but when we look at price, they decrease much more than. And so I think you should use digital technologies to actually lower the price of experimentation, which will make the innovation process much less costly and painful. And there might be other things related to that, but I think these are two of the main ones I think that can help out.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
So noting their questions, right?
Nice.
Okay, let's do the last one and then we close.
Yeah.
Two people asking the same question.
Hopefully the last example would be helpful for you about the kid. And
Oh, it's number 2 as well. So I'm
so you already
repeating the
know.
innovation
Exactly.
segment.
You already know.
I have a question regarding behaviors around innovation, because tied to what has just been asked to. Sometimes you are the innovator, but you have like the second innovation or the innovation built on top of the initial one that is sometimes more successful.
Yeah.
And so I want to hear your thoughts on the frustration of being the innovator, and suddenly someone comes with the version 2.0, or sometimes built on the success of something that has been firstly innovated.
That's a great question. Look, oftentimes we mistake innovation with ideation. That's a first mistake. And with being the first at doing something. So we often confuse innovation with doing something new. And that's when we get frustrated, definitely, when someone else comes and does something better than us. And we thought we were being innovative, and that one stole our idea. And then we think, oh, everything that I learned at business school about the blue ocean strategy and about the advantage of the first mover was wrong. Like, you blame your professors. And the truth is that they were wrong. Because there is a recent article, from a guy that launched the Hootsuite, that's like a SaaS platform for social media monitoring, Brian Holmes. It's a great article it's called The Disadvantage of the First Mover. He said, in a digital world, ideas became commodity. Because everyone can have a great idea. I can just, okay, I'm running in the morning and then I have an idea. And what happens when we have new ideas, we often rush to Google and we Google it, at least happens with me, and I'm like, hopefully nobody's already talking about this or nobody has ever tried that. And you get frustrated when you see like there's already 40 startups doing that, and you're like, oh, there's other, all the other oil and gas companies might be doing that, and you're like, oh, I'm not being innovative anymore. You drop the idea. And that's wrong. Why? Because we associate again with being the first. But the truth is that the best definition of innovation that I've ever found is one that comes from design thinking that says innovation is nothing else than the combination of three elements in any product, business model, process, anything that we want to make innovative. It's like, first, it has to solve a problem. And oftentimes, that's the thing that we often overlook, is we have great ideas, but they're not solving anyone's problem, and so they do not become innovative. First thing. The second thing is very much related to what you said. Second is execution agility. And we have to have the power to execute this idea swiftly, with quality and everything, because otherwise someone will come, validate, get our idea that we validated something, but we're very slow. Look at Instagram stories with Snapchat. I don't think Facebook ever innovated again after they launched their first version at college campuses. But, okay, not always in the best way, but they've been purchasing those that, threaten them, but they also copied, very clearly, others, but with their execution, to the second very big pillar of innovation, they managed to make it. And the third pillar is economic viability, because oftentimes we get a prototype of an idea, we are solving a huge problem, but then it's not scalable because it's not even viable, or even at Shell, we can be super ambitious, we can have a huge idea of doing something with the technology, and then eventually it will never be scaled because that technology. Look at renewables up until recently. Renewables, the big problem was their cost effectiveness, and just recently nowadays are proving to be. Were they not innovative before, or are they innovative now? I don't know. They migrated towards being innovative and solving a problem just because they're viable. Otherwise, it was just a technology that was out there but was representing less than 1% of the energy matrix of any big company. And so I think that's really what innovation is about. Thank you.
Let me check if we have an online question. Anyone that is in our virtual room?
No hands raised.
No hands raised. All right.
About lunchtime, sorry.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
so Andrea will be with us the entire afternoon, so feel free to reach him. Andrea, thank you very much. I knew that you'd rock.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you.